Okay. So in this section, we have the expert, Dr. Upasana Talukdar. She is from Central University of Rajasthan. I welcome you, madam. And let me introduce Dr. Upasana, ma'am. So Dr. Upasana Talukdar is an assistant professor in the Department of Data Science and Analytics at Central University of Rajasthan. Prior to that, she has completed her BTech from Northeastern Hill University, India, where she is a gold medalist. She also holds Institute's Gold Medal for academic excellence during Master of Technology at Tezpur University. She has completed her PhD in Computer Science and Engineering from Tezpur University in year 2019. During her PhD, she was a visiting researcher at University of Essex and worked a part of her PhD under Professor John Gant, Professor, School of Electrical and Computer Engineering, University of Essex. Dr. Upasana is interested in rehabilitation, robotics, the encompass research in artificial intelligence, human computer interaction, and cognitive science. So please, Dr. Upasana, hand over.
Thank you very much, sir. So it's my pleasure to be invited as a speaker for this FDP program. So here I would like to portray a brief stint of what brain-computer interface is and how machine learning algorithms plays a vital role in brain-computer interfacing. So in the first session, like you had a lecture on artificial intelligence and blockchain. So this brain-computer interfacing is also an application in the field of artificial intelligence. And although it is very difficult to portray a detailed picture of what BCI is and its working within 1 hour and 1.5 hours, so I will try to give a brief taxonomy on it. So without going too much into the technical details and all. So is my slides visible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, it is visible.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the rough presentation outline is that a quick introduction to brain-computer interfacing, then different brain-computer interfacing signals, and I will be focusing on mainly the electroencephalography, which is called in short EEG signals. Then the EEG signal pre-processing, a very rough and brief description of pre-processing and extraction techniques. And then mainly I will focus on machine learning for EEG-based BCI. What are the challenges in EEG signal processing with traditional machine learning algorithms, and how deep learning improves EEG signal processing. So to begin with, a saying goes like this: think and make it happen. So you have to think, and you have to think of performing certain actions, and that actions can be conducted without actually performing that action. So how it can be done? So this is what brain-computer interface answers. So it is a methodology that enables communication based on brain signals. So it interprets the human brain patterns into messages or commands to communicate with the outer world, and it underpins many novel applications like that are important to people's daily life, especially to people with psychological or physical disabilities. So it enables the disabled elders and other people with limited motion ability to control wheelchairs, home appliances, and robots. So in general, brain-computer interfacing systems make use of the traditional machine learning methods to decode the ongoing brain signals in real time. And via BCIs, the user shall be able to type text, control a computer or wheelchair, even if they are severely motor impaired. So the main aim of BCI is to embellish the quality of life of physically disabled people and improve the individual's independence. So different and intelligent assistive devices driven by BCI have been developed. So as for example, just take an example that a severely motor impaired person is using a wheelchair, and he is alone in his home. So suppose he wanted to go towards right direction. So in that case, what the BCI will do, so the person has to just imagine that he is moving towards the right direction. So these signals will be interpreted and it will be fed into computer program where machine learning algorithms will decode the intention that yes, he wants to go towards the right direction, and it will direct, and once it is classified as right direction movement, it will give the command to the wheelchair, go towards the right direction, and the wheelchair will be moved to that particular direction. So this is basically that person has not done any specific movement. He has to just imagine the movement, and this imagination will be captured by means of brain signals. These signals will be interpreted, and then finally it will be decoded what his intention is. So once his imagination and his intention is decoded, so the computer will direct that particular hardware like wheelchair and others to perform that particular task, and accordingly the wheelchair will move towards that particular direction. So to perform such task, so different components are there, like different steps, stages or steps we can say. So it is realized only by using this, by going through these steps. So as for example, as you can see in this picture, that that person is actually imagining some kind of mental task, and his activity is recorded. And this is which is known as brain imaging. And once his activities are recorded, the signals, it should be pre-processed. This is a traditional data science approach, like pre-processing, feature extraction, then applying machine learning. So you have to interpret the signals first by pre-processing to remove the outliers, artifacts, and normalizing it, etc. Then extracting the features like to gain the relevant information from the accurate data, and then classify to determine which brain state the recorded signals correspond to. And finally, whatever the results you will find from this data science approach, you will give the this result to the application interface, where it will trigger a specific event. So that event may be like a specific letter appears on the screen. Suppose you are thinking of some letter and that letter will be appear on the screen, or the wheelchair is moved to a certain direction, or the user receives feedback about how well he is performing in accomplishing certain task. So these are mainly the steps that the BCI must go through, that the BCI systems comprises of. And finally, it will take as input the brain signals or the brain images, and as output, it gives the feedback or the application. Okay. So mainly, this classification plays a very vital role in decoding the intention, because if it goes wrong, so everything will go wrong. So we will be mainly focusing on this classification technique, which can be accomplished by applying different machine learning methods. So in addition to the use of brain-computer interface for communication purposes, it can be also used for control. Like one of the most common example is the use of BCI is the control of a computer cursor. You have to just imagine that you are moving the cursor to this side and that side, and the cursor will move automatically. Or the use of a BCI for controlling a prosthetic limb. So based on this application, so the Underwood Court in their paper, they have categorized the brain-computer interface into 3 different categories. First is that the active BCI, which is used for controlling an application and is independent of any external events. So just as like I have just described one example, like a person is just imagining that he wants to move towards a particular direction and the wheelchair is moving. So this is independent of any external events. And so this is generated automatically. He has to just imagine, and there is no external stimulus is there. So this is known as active BCI, and it is used for controlling an application. Then the second one is reactive BCI. So it arises like out of reaction due to an external stimulus. As for example, suppose stimuli such as letters, symbols, it flashes in succession on a screen, and the participant has to direct their attention to the symbol he or she wants to select. So in that case, that because of that stimulus that is flashes that is being flashed on the screen, some kind of changes will occur in the brain activity, and that brain activity will be captured to determine which symbol the user want to select. So this is called reactive BCI. The name reactive because it is in reaction to the external stimulus. And the third one is the passive BCI. So it provides the information on user cognitive states. As for example, suppose a person is suffering from severe like mental diseases like Alzheimer and or other kind of, like he is also experiencing too much fatigue level or drowsiness level. So this kind of mental states can also be analyzed by brain-computer interface. So this type of brain-computer interface that analyzes the mental states of a particular person is known as passive BCI. So coming to the first component of the brain-computer interface. So here, the activities of the brain can be acquired by means of invasive and non-invasive methods. So in case of invasive methods, the signals or the activities of the brain are detected within the cortex of the brain. So this is mainly done by implanting the electrodes by means of some surgical procedures. And non-invasive means the signals or the activities of the brain are acquired from the scalp of the user. So, as for example, electroencephalography, magnetoencephalography. So this can be acquired from the scalp of the user, from the surface of the scalp, and invasive means from within the cortex of the brain, the signals or the activities of the brain can be acquired. So this is the very rough classification of BCI signals. So as already defined, invasive and non-invasive. So this electrocorticogram, in some papers define it as partially invasive because it can be detected at the cortical surface, that is in the middle of the surface and not exactly within the cortex. But most of the paper define this signal as one of the invasive modality. And intracortical means within the cortex, which is mainly done by means of surgical procedures. And these two are like quite risky because it involves like you have to go deep into the brain and then you have to acquire all these activities. So which is not very ethical to use, and also it's become very much risky for the participants. So mainly the brain-computer interface is based on all the non-invasive modalities. So this is the EEG, then fNIRS, that is the functional near infrared spectroscopy, fMRI, that is the functional magnetic resonance imaging, PET, that is position emission tomography, SPECT, that is single photon emission computed tomography. So this table summarizes and compares like the different non-invasive modalities that are particularly being used by brain-computer interfaces. So EEG, it measures the like electrical potential, and its advantages are that it is like portable, it is inexpensive, it is wearable, it has high temporal resolution. But the disadvantage is that it has low spatial resolution and it needs careful placement of electrodes. If you put the electrodes in long position, you will get noise instead of the informative signal. So by the term temporal resolution, so temporal resolution means it is sensitive to millisecond changes. And spatial resolution means it is also sensitive to the position of the electrodes, and it affect it also it gets affected because of the electrode density and all. Then coming to the next modality is fMRI. So it measures the magnetic properties of blood to determine the hemoglobin decrease in the active brain area. So certain movements or certain actions lead to some increase in the hemoglobin areas or or decrease in hemoglobin amount. So that measure, so fMRI measures that magnetic properties to determine this deoxyhemoglobin decrease or increase. And although it has very high spatial resolution, it has low temporal resolution, and the size is like it is very bulky in size and it is quite expensive. Then the third modality is magnetoencephalography. So here it measures the magnetic potentials which is generated due to the electrical activity of the brain. It has high temporal and spatial resolutions, but the size is like very huge and it is very costly. Then fourth modality is FNIRS. So it measures the scattering of near infrared light and its absorption to determine the variation in tissue deoxygenation and neuronal membranes. So although it has very high spatial resolution, inexpensive, portable, wearable, and doesn't require any expertise for setup, it has a low temporal resolution. Then PET, it measures the blood flow. So I have not put any advantages here because some paper defined it as a very medium spatial and temporal resolution, and some paper defined it as some like high temporal and spatial resolution. But this advantage is that bulky and expensive, and it requires an injection of radioactive substances, which is not very acceptable by the participants or by any medical experts. Then SPECT, it is also one kind of variation of this. So it also measures the blood flow. And the disadvantage is that although it is very less expensive as compared to that of PET, but it has low temporal and spatial resolution. It is bulky in size, expensive, and it also requires an injection of radioactive substances. So if we compare all the advantages and disadvantages of different modalities, so we can see that EEG and FNIRS are highly advantageous as compared to other. And most current BCIs are using EEG as a tool to acquire brain signals, like to detect the mental state and communicative intent of a user. So although one of its drawback is that it has low low spatial resolution, but despite of this drawback, it is generally favored because of its low cost, portability, low setup requirements, and non-invasiveness. So here I will be mainly focusing on EEG-based brain-computer interfacing. So I have tried to classify the EEG signals into different categories. So first is the spontaneous EEG, which is natural. So this EEG can be analyzed for various analysis like sleeping. So sleeping EEG, like it is used to recognize the sleep stages and diagnosing the sleeping disorders or how to cultivate a healthy habit of sleeping. Then motor imagery EEG, so motor imagery. So imagery means imagination, and here you have to imagine a movement. You are not actually performing a movement, but you suppose you are imagining that you are moving your right hand and you are moving your left hand, but you are not actually performing, but you are just imagining. And based on your imagination, these signals will be interpreted, and your image, what type of image, whether left hand or right hand, that will be classified. So this type of EEG that is useful for analyzing the imagination of movements is known as motor imagery EEG. Then the third is the emotional EEG. Suppose the emotion, we all know that emotions of an individual, it can be evaluated in two main aspects, like valence and arousal. So valence means it express the pleasant or unpleasant feeling. Arousal means like the level of affective activation. Okay, as for example, consider the emotion joy. So here joy is a very pleasant feeling, so it's a high valence, and it's also one kind of excited feeling, so it's also a high arousal. So it is a high valence, high arousal. Similarly, if you consider the emotion anger, so in that case, you have a very unpleasant feeling, so it's a low valence, but it has one kind of excited feeling, so that's why it is high arousal. So this is low valence, high arousal. Then suppose the emotion you consider as sadness. So sadness, it's a very unpleasant feeling, and it's not an excited feeling, obviously. So it will be under the category of low valence, low arousal. And suppose the emotion like relaxed, so it's a very pleasant feeling, which is the high valence, and it's a low arousal, so it will come under low valence and high valence and low arousal. So in this way we can categorize the emotions also, and the EEG that can be used for analysis of these emotional states can be considered as emotional EEG. Then the fourth one is the mental diseases. So large number of researchers also use EEG signals to diagnose the neurological disorders like Alzheimer, epileptic seizure, etc. So, and others, so others mean the different mental states you can analyze, like the fatigue level, drowsiness level, or the attention level, the focus level, okay, the workload level. So all this can be analyzed by EEG. The next category that I have defined is the ERD and ERS. So ERD is event-related desynchronization, and ERS is the event-related synchronization. So desynchronization means decreasing in power or the decreasing in the amplitude, and ERS means increasing in the power. So certain activities also leads to the increase or decrease in the amplitude in certain frequency band. So in that cases, we can also use that portion of that segment of EEG for analysis of different like imaginations or mental diseases, etc. Then third category is evoked potential. So here the like various kinds of events can also evoke the changes in EEG data. So if it evokes changes in the EEG data by means of some kind of sensory stimuli, so that will be called as event-related potential, in short ERP. And so another category is steady state visually evoked potential. So here when the subject like stares at a light which is flickering at a particular frequency, so in that case this steady state visually evoked potentials are produced. And this kind of stimulus also induces some kinds of activations in the different EEG components with the same frequency. So coming to the second step of EEG, so artifact removal plays like indispensable role in order to ensure clean EEG. And the typical sources of artifacts are eye blinking and muscle movement like tongue movement, then facial movement, etc. So it means when a participant is you are recording the EEG signals from a participant, so in that case the participant may blink his eyes, so that can be also considered as noise. Okay, so it is very important to remove the artifacts before interpreting the signals. So that's why artifact removal is one of the, like, it plays a vital role in order to ensure a very clean and pure EEG. So first method you can use is the reference physiological signals. So physiological signals like electromyogram and electrooculogram, which can detect the muscle movements and eye blinking respectively, and thus can be used to differentiate between unwanted and required trials. Different statistical methods like independent component analysis, principal component analysis you can apply to reduce the artifacts in EEG signals. And visual inspection, like in such cases, recorded EEG data can be visually inspected and eliminated through experts. However, it is suitable for offline analysis. So normally the range, the frequency range here, normally the amplitude of EEG is up to 100 microvolts. So if it is above 100 microvolts, this is normally considered as noise. So by means of visual inspection also one can go for a clean EEG, but this is only suitable for offline analysis. Then the second method is referencing, which is very well extensive used technique to deal with the noisy signals and improve the signal to noise ratio. Why it is required? It is because while you are recording EEG, so EEG recording is the value which is obtained by the difference of the value obtained by EEG electrode minus the value obtained by the ground electrode. And in case of the ground electrode, it always picks up some noises. So to remove these noises, referencing is normally used. So the first method is called as common reference, where besides the EEG electrodes, extra electrodes are placed on the subject's earlobes, and the data from these extra electrodes are subtracted from the EEG electrodes. Then common average reference, so where all the electrodes are averaged and the average value thus obtained is subtracted from all the electrodes. And third one is the Laplacian filtering. So here the value of each electrode is the result of subtracting the weighted average of its neighboring electrodes. So this is the the second step of achieving a good brain-computer interface system. Then coming to the third step is the feature extraction method. So raw EEG signals are very tough to interpret, and hence a translation process is very much substantial. So in order to extract the relevant information from the accurate signals, the features would be extracted. But although it is not very possible to discuss each of the feature extraction method in details now, so here I will be presenting a very simple taxonomy. So first here is the spectral parameters. So EEG activities, like for different mental states, it occurs at different frequency ranges. So one of the approach that can be used the most, or you can say the most preferred tool for spectral analysis of EEG signal is the Fourier transform, which is widely used to obtain the spectral parameters, and its enhanced version is first Fourier transform, which is normally used for spectral to obtain the spectral parameters from different frequency bands. And second is the parametric modeling. So this modeling assumes that EEG signals correspond to a linear mathematical model based on Gaussian properties. So in that case, the most preferred tool that comes under this modeling is autoregressive model. Third is the time frequency representation. So due to EEG non-stationarity means its statistics vary across time. The spectral information cannot encompass the complete representation of the EEG signals. So another version of Fourier transform, which is known as short-time Fourier transform, is used that also includes the temporal information of the EEG signals. Fourth one is a statistical, so that deals with the spatial information of EEG data. So the most commonly used methods for dealing like spatial information are like ICA, PCA, and CSP. CSP is called Common Spatial Pattern. So it is proved to be the most successful feature extraction algorithm to represent the spatial dependencies of EEG data in the last few years. And hybrid approaches means features from different domains may be amalgamated or combined, and which would lead to better class separability of EEG features. So the final goal of BCA system is to identify the intent of the user so as to translate the identified intent into certain action. Hence, after pre-processing an extraction of features, so there comes the classification that classifies the signal at a particular time point into one of the cognitive tasks. So there comes the role of machine learning in BCI. So it provides a way to link the brain activation patterns to behavior at an individual subject level. So normally supervised learning is used, although unsupervised, people have adopted unsupervised learning also, but it is very rarely employed in this field. And but to select the best machine learning algorithm from the available tools is always a challenge for the researchers. So, so thus, like in the previous in the previous day, Dr. Vikas had explained the term bias variance trade-off. So that bias variance trade-off should be employed to pick up the best machine learning algorithm that fits well on the particular data. So coming to the general machine learning setting for BCI, so it's the same to that of the like what you apply a machine learning algorithm on other data sets. So for the training phase, where if X is a continuous stream of EZ in n-dimensional space, and XK is a sample, so this can be used as XK is a sample, and suppose the subjects are asked to perform individual but fixed mental tasks like motor imagery of their left and right hand. So there will be two classes. So motor imagery of left hand and motor imagery of right hand. And you have to associate those EZ vectors XK with the respective class levels and for the two mental states. Suppose two mental states, so this is represented as YK. So this YK, it will be either +1 or -1. So suppose the +1 is for motor imagery of the left hand, and -1 is the motor imagery of right hand. And after collecting sufficient amount of trials, so machine learning approach will learn the complex function between the feature vectors and the class levels. So although you can directly learn this mapping from the raw EEG data, but it is proved in the literature that if you go for extracting the features and then you apply the then you apply this mapping, then it always gives the best result. So here I will be covering two very simple examples of applying different machine learning algorithms on different EEG analysis. So this have been done under the supervision of like Professor Samantha Hazarika. So I think you all know the first speaker of today. So he was my PhD supervisor, and so I have done these two. These are very simple experiments that I am going to portray here. So just to give you a notion, give you an idea how machine learning can be applied in EEG analysis. So first example is the estimation of mental fatigue using EEG, and here I have mainly applied the regression technique. So coming to this, so first, the one thing you have to always consider that while you are going for a brain-computer interface, one thing that is quite important, and it is the first phase of your experiment, is the acquisition of the brain signal, or you can also call for a good experimental setting. So here, what is the motivation of estimating mental fatigue? This is because, like in motor imagery BCI, so motor imagery, you know that while you are imagining some kind of movements, so in such kind of BCI, subjects often experience like substantial amount of fatigue. This is because like these are quite monotonous. You have to sit for a long time and you have to keep on thinking. So this is like quite monotonous task, and it often leads the subject to experience mental fatigue. And so when the person experiences mental fatigue, they require much, their attention level decreases, and as a result, they will fail to imagine properly, or we can say in that case, signal gets disrupted. So the first thing is that you have to estimate the mental fatigue while you are performing the motor imagery data. So this is what the aim of the experiment. So here you can see that the person is sitting at an approximate of 80 centimeter from the LCD screen, and this is the electrode cap that he is wearing, and these electrodes are used for like acquiring the EEG signals. So he have to perform the motor imagery task, and during that task, we have to analyze his fatigue level. So this is the experimental paradigm that I have used. So the whole experiment runs for like 1.5 hours, and this whole experiment, we have divided it into different runs. So runs means here each run consists of 80 trials. So what is a trial? You can also think of as a sample. So this is the definition of this trial. So for the first 2 seconds, a fixation cross will appear. As you can see here, so this is the fixation cross. So once the fixation cross will appear, so after 2 seconds, a Q in the form of circle. So this is the Q. This will appear. And when this cross will appear, it will ask the subjects to get ready for the motor imagery task. And this Q will tell that subject which motor imagery tasks that participant has to perform. Like if that Q is at the bottom of the cross, that means he had to imagine the feet movement. If it is the right hand of the cross, he has to imagine the right hand movement. If it is in the left hand of the cross, he has to imagine the left hand movement. If it is like at the top of the cross, he has to imagine the tongue movement. So 4 different motor imagery tasks he have to imagine. And he have to imagine these for 3 seconds, and after 3 seconds break will be given to them. So the whole thing is that user have to look for this, keep on looking this Q, and based on this position of the Q, he has to perform the motor imagery task. So these are some of the questionnaires that are used for estimating the fatigue level subjectively. Like some of the questions are there, not at all tired, not at all sleepy, like this, and the participants has to circle a number to determine the level, what level of fatigue he or she is experiencing at a particular time. So this is another questionnaire that he or she has to answer. So this is another questionnaire. So this is not actually questionnaire, this is a scale. So 1 is the least fatigue, 5 is the most fatigue, and in between them, they have to, like from 1 to 5, they have to rate their fatigue level. So these questionnaires were presented to them after the end of each run, just to have the fatigue level subjectively. So total 11 participants participated in the experiment, and 5 participants left in the middle. They could not complete the whole experiment because of experiencing high fatigue. Now, once the EEG were recorded, then it's the normal pre-processing is done. Features are extracted. So for the features, the EEG data collected was subjected to first Fourier transform to obtain the spectral power in different frequency bands. And then the features are selected. And for training and testing purposes, so from the questionnaires that the subjects had reported, where the subject had reported their fatigue level, so we have found that the subjects experienced least fatigue during the first run and most fatigue during the last run. So the first run and the last run were used for training data. And first run, all the samples from the first run is labeled as, they are labeled as low fatigue, and all the samples from the last run were labeled as high fatigue. So, and all the intermediate runs were then used for testing or predicting the fatigue level. And then once we get the optimized feature vector after selecting the features, so this feature vector was then used to track the growth of fatigue, and monitoring of the fatigue level was done using Cardell-Purcell least square regression. So this is one kind of nonlinear regression technique. So it is an enhanced version or nonlinear variance of Purcell least square. So what is the difference between least square and this one is that it first reduces the dimension of the data, just like PCA, and then applies regression on that reduced dimension. Okay, instead of the original data, it first reduces the dimension and it that applies regression on that reduced dimension of the data. And it takes as input like two matrices, the features and the class levels. So class levels is a low fatigue, which is we have given as -1, and high fatigue, which we have given as like +1, and -1 for low fatigue, and obviously +1 for high fatigue. And features are the spectral powers. And then output is the KPLA score. So what is this KPLA score? So when you perform regression, you will get the regression coefficients. And suppose you have the equation, you know the equation of regression, y equal to suppose mx plus some error or constant. So this m and x, so m is the regression coefficients. Once you get the regression coefficients, when you project this regression coefficients to again the input data, like when you project m to x, then you will get some kind of value of y. Okay, so this y is nothing but the predicted value. So this predicted value is taken as the scores, which we have named it as KPLA scores. So for every trial, you will get one like KPLA scores. And so for each run, there are 80 trials. So we have taken the mean of the KPLA scores, and that mean value is taken as the fatigue level of that particular run. So this is the this shows like how the first run, what is the level of fatigue, second run, what is the level of fatigue, and so on. And you can see a very waxing and waning behavior can be observed here. And here, out of 11, only 6 participants could complete the whole experiment. So therefore, we have analyzed the fatigue level for the 6 participants. And we have found some kind of prediction like this. And then we have verified this prediction and validated prediction with the subjective scores, which they have rated after the end of every run. And we found like around correlation of greater than 95. So, and we, after validation, once we get the correlation between the subjective scores and the predicted scores as around high correlation, so we can say that yes, that our model is performing good. So this is an example like how we can apply some kind of regression for easy analysis. So second example is very simple. It's a very simple experiment. So here we have taken a publicly available data set from BCI Competition 2 dataset 4, where EEG is recorded using 28 channels from a single subject. And it consists of around 416 samples, each of around 500 milliseconds in length, where 316 samples were used for training and 100 samples were used for testing. And during the experiment, the subject was asked to be seated on a chair and to press the key of a computer keyboard with their little finger of their left and right hand. And the task is to predict whether they have pressed the keyboard with either the left hand or right hand. Okay. So we have the data, like we have the publicly available data. Now we have already the ready-made data. So we have just pre-processed the EEG data. And yeah, the contribution of this experiment is very different. Like here we have like focused on finding the optimal time segment, like it is a 500 millisecond. Like EEG trial is normally a long sequence, and if you go on processing a long sequence of EEG signals, it's very time consuming. So the contribution of this is to divide the EEG signals into different time segments and pick up that time window that gives the most discriminative information. So we have splitted the data into different time segments, and we have extracted the features and selected the features. Obviously, the training and testing partitions is already there in the data set, and obtain the best timing signals, which is like we have used some another technique, and then apply different machine learning algorithms on that, and we found that naive Bayes performs best. So we have included the results of naive Bayes in that work. So this is the methodology exactly. So here you have the EEG signal. So you have divided the EEG signal into different time segments, and for each of the segments, we have extracted the features. And once we have extracted the features based on Davis Baldwin index we have used, based on that score, we have selected the optimal time segment, and that optimal time segment is used for the analysis. So here on the training data, we have like performed all these things, feature selection, then training the classifier model and all, and then we have applied it on the testing phase. So, but there are some challenges in EEG processing with the traditional machine learning techniques. So first is that EEG signals, like they are very easily corrupted by various biological and environmental artifacts. Like biological means like eye blinks, muscle artifacts, fatigue, concentration level. So in that case, EEG signals gets corrupted, and environmental factors means noises. Okay, temperature may also be an environmental factors. In that case, the people may sweat. Okay, so in that case, the EEG signals get corrupted. Then second one is that EEG signal has a very low signal to noise ratio. As the brain activity measured is often buried under multiple sources of environmental, physiological, and activity-specific noise, like of similar or greater amplitude. And low SNR cannot be easily addressed by traditional pre-processing or feature engineering methods due to the time complexity of those methods and the risk of information loss. Although there are referencing techniques or there are artifact removal techniques is there, but it will not guarantee a very 100% clean EEG. And also that the thing is that feature engineering here highly depend on human expertise in a specific domain. So as for example, if you are like analyzing the different sleeping state of EEG signals, it requires the basic biological knowledge to investigate the sleeping state. So human experience may help on certain aspects, but it falls insufficient in more general circumstances. So an automatic feature extraction method is highly desirable in such case. Third one is the non-stationarity. That means its statistics vary across time. And fourth one is the high inter-subject variability. It also limits the usefulness of EEG applications. So this phenomena arises due to the physiological differences like between individuals. And if you can look for the literature, you can find that traditional machine learning mainly performs on static data, mainly focuses on static data, and therefore it fails sometimes to classify rapidly changing brain signals accurately. So here it comes the role of deep learning. So it's a very recent field that people have now recently started using deep learning in EEG signal processing. So it has two advantages, that it directly works on the raw brain signals, thus avoiding the time-consuming pre-processing and feature engineering. And it can also capture the both representative high-level features and latent dependencies through deep architectures. So here I have tried to categorize the deep learning models. So I will not go into the detail of the detailed architecture of all these things, because already Dr. Kagita has mentioned what are these models. So first one is the discriminative deep learning models, where it classifies the input data into known categories and by learning the discriminative features adaptively. So it is mainly used for feature engineering and classification. So some of the most commonly widely deep learning model under this category is the multi-layer perceptron, then recurrent neural network, then convolutional neural network, then recurrent neural network. As you know, it has the variations like LSTM and gated recurrent units. Then coming to the second model, that is the representative model. So here the models learn pure representative features from the input data. So such algorithms only serve for like feature engineering rather than classification. So commonly used algorithms for these categories includes like autoencoder, restricted Boltzmann machine, deep belief networks. So here deep belief networks can be composed of either autoencoder or RBM. So I have divided DBN into DBN-A or DBN-RBM. And then generative deep learning models. So here it learns the joint probability distribution of the input data along with the target level. So generative algorithms are most commonly used in like reconstruction or, sorry, reconstruction of a new sample, okay, or generation of a new sample. So commonly used models are the variational autoencoder and like generative adversarial networks. And hybrid is the combination of any two models. So I have also taken hybrid as one of the categories. So this is the summary of like different deep learning models. So here you can see the discriminative, the output is the level, and main function is the feature extraction and classification. So representative is the output is the representation, and the function is feature extraction mainly. It has nothing to do with the classification. And generative is the like a generation of a new sample, and maybe the generation and reconstruction. So some of the like popular BCI paradigms or applications that I want to portray to you is like first is the healthcare. So some of the things that people have done using EEG is the sleeping states analysis, sleeping disorder analysis, mental diseases like Alzheimer, epileptic, depression. Then another category is the smart environment. So what is smart environment? So you can think that it is a promising application scenario for BCI in the future. So with the development of IoT, of smart environment can be connected to BCI. So as for instance, you can take the example of like assisting robots can be used in smart home, in which the robot can be controlled using brain signals. Okay. So I think that in the near future, research on brain controlled appliances may be beneficial in smart homes and smart hospitals, although not very much have done, literature has done using brain signals and all. So I have included this category as because I think it's a very promising application scenario for BCI in the near future. Then another category is the like affective computing. So affective computing means like analyzing of different not mental states. You can see the emotional states of persons. So if you are analyzing the different emotions of a person, so it can be categorized as affective computing BCI. So driver fatigue detection is one of the application. Mental load measurement is one of the application. And some of the deep learning literature that can be found under this paradigm are as follows. So you can see some like of combination of different deep learning methods where the fusion of decisions were taken to predict the final outcome. So this representative model is taken here for learning the features. Similarly, here you can see the combination of deep learning and traditional machine learning have been used. So normally, again, the combination of RNN and CNN have been used where the decisions were evaluated independently and they were fused to get the final outcome. And the rest of the things, rest of the literature, they have mainly employed CNN for different applications. So you can see from here that there are not much applications of deep learning in BCI paradigms till date. Okay, so what is the observations that I have found? That at first the design of CNN is powerful enough to extract the hidden features and the spatial dependencies from the EEG signals for classification. So as a result, CNN structures are adopted for classification in some studies, while adopted for feature engineering in some other studies. Then in terms of RNN, like only we can say like around 20% of discriminative model-based papers adopted RNN, and which is much less than we can expect, since RNN has like demonstrated powerful in temporal feature learning. So one of the possible reason for this may be because the processing a long sequence by RNN is very time consuming, and EEG signals are generally from a long sequence. So as for example, if you consider a sleeping signal, so they are usually around 30-second signals. So if the sampling rate is around 100 hertz, so it will have around 3000 time points. So it is a very long sequence, and in that case training of RNN will take much time. So maybe because of this, RNN has been least adopted in this application. And multilayer perceptron is not very popular in this field, maybe because of its inferior effectiveness as compared to that of other deep learning models. And as for representative model, DBN is the most popular model, and DBN RBM is most widely used. If we can go for the papers on representative models or representative models based papers, we can find that DBN is the most widely used deep learning model out of the others. Like out of others means like autoencoder and all. And generative models are very rarely employed independently in these applications. So what we think about the future directions. So first is that like one promising is the explainable general framework. So if we can develop a general framework that can handle easy signals regardless of the number of channels used for signal collection, the sample dimension and stimulus types, so it will be beneficial. And another direction is the implementation of the attention mechanism by deep learning models. So I think it's a very popular mechanism nowadays that is employed by deep learning. So where you have to concentrate on a few things while ignoring the others. If you have a large amount of information, you have to concentrate only on a particular thing instead of the whole thing, and you have to simply ignore the others. So this has not been employed in BCI till now. So I think one possible direction is the implementation of attention mechanism. So it can be based on some kind of attention scores or by different machine learning algorithms such as reinforcement learning. And another possible direction may like how to interpret the feature representation like derived by the deep neural network, or what is the intrinsic relationship between the learned features and the task related neural pattern or neuropathology of mental disorders. So this kind of relationship we can learn, which is not yet explored from the perspective of neuroscience. So this relationship can be learned in the near future. So another direction is the use of transfer learning. So transfer learning, as you know, so it means that you are storing some knowledge which you are gained while solving one problem, and you are applying it to a different but related problem. So in case of like BCI classification, it does when we focus on a person-dependent scenarios, like where the training samples and testing samples are collected from the identical individuals. Of course, there are some literature which which also focuses on like inter-subject evaluation, like training data from different persons and testing data on different persons, but the performance is not very good. Okay, so mainly we have concentrated on inter-person evaluations. That means training and testing samples are collected from the identical individual. So here I think we can go for transfer learning, and we can use this methodology for building up a personalized model in case of the brain-computer interfacing also. But one of the drawbacks that we may face while employing deep learning in BCI paradigm, it is because so we have to collect the data in case of BCI, and the collected normally deep learning requires, like for better performance of deep learning, it requires a large amount of training data. So it may not be possible to acquire a large amount of easy data for training purposes, but still people have started doing research on deep learning in BCI. So as the ethics of the research says, that go on trying and evaluating. So we should keep on trying to gain a better performance, to have a better performance of BCI systems. So the final take, so what I can conclude from this lecture, that yes, I have given a very rough overview of what the brain-computer interfaces. It is nothing but you have to just imagine the thoughts, and these thoughts will be converted into actions. But to have a better performance, we need to classify, or we need to decode the intent of the user correctly, and for that we have to employ the best machine learning algorithms in that case. So how to select the best machine algorithm? It's on you. You have to play with the data, you have to go for testing and evaluating, and then you have to come up with the best machine learning algorithm. So I think that's all. So if you have any questions, I'm ready to take it all.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
People are people are also talking about neuromorphic computing,
Yes.
and they are also
Ye-
applying all learning techniques.
Yes.
And as you said, you are also applying deep learning, machine learning techniques. So the performance-wise or in other performance parameters, which one will be better?
That's very
Or
difficult to say.
neuromorphic is similar?
It will be very
Is it similar
difficult.
to neuromorphic? Yeah,
Neuromorphic,
please.
neuromorphic actually, I have not yet explored, so I'm not the best person to answer it. So what I think that regarding the performance, first you have to play with the data. So everything, like your methodology and your approaches, it depends on the on the set of data. Okay, so you have to go for playing with the data,
Right.
and then you have to go for a particular methodology or selection of a particular algorithm for this.
Okay, so all these are dealing, once we acquire the brain signals, then all these are signal processing and some kind of pre-processing things. Now, is they are using some particular sampling methods in deep learning?
No, I have actually, to be very frank, I have not started deep learning in BCI. So what this will be my next course of action. So I have not yet started. So sampling for deep learning, I don't think it will be
Because-
applicable in easy data. It is not, I don't think that it will be required.
Okay, because deep belief networks and RBM, you told that this is better methodology in feature extraction.
Yes, yes. This is what I have observed from the literature. So people have
Okay.
mostly used deep
Okay,
learning
thank you.
RBM on that data.
Ma'am, some of the participants have given
Right.
some questions on the chat box. May I read it?
Yes, sir.
So whether the electrode signal affect the subject brain? Somebody asked it.
No, actually, if you are acquiring the signals from the surface of the brain, that's what I have called it as non-invasive. So it will not affect the brain. So that's why they have categorized as invasive and non-invasive. So invasive, the electrode signals may affect the brain. So that's why I have called it a very risky procedure. But in case of non-invasive, you are acquiring the signals from the surface of the human brain. So in that case, it will not affect the brain.
Okay. Any more questions?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, Ajay.
First of all, thank you so much, ma'am, for this great session. And my question is, can we use BCI and ECG signal for visualization of human dreams?
BCI and ECG.
Yes, ma'am.
ECG is the measure of the heart rate, right? So what is your aim? It depends on your objective.
My objective is to visualize the human dreams.
Human dreams. I think, yes, people have done this, I think. So EEG and ECG have been used for dreams, I don't know, but for the particular intent they have used. Like for some kind of intent, their heart rate increases. So in that case, ECG will help. So you can combine the features from both EEG and ECG, and you can go for a particular model.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, I think there is no more questions. So I thank you, Dr. Upasana ma'am, for touching the deep learning, CNN, RNN with the EEG based techniques and signals. I'm again thankful to you for delivering the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.